What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. The season has officially kicked off. We are underway a couple days in, but I am going to wrap up my preseason contender tiers, which I guess at this point is not so much preseason. Again, apologies for not getting everything out before the game started, but I've only got one episode left of my 6-episode series that I've been doing for this. Today, I will cover tiers 2 and tiers 1, so the top 2 tiers of championship contenders for this season. With that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So starting off with tier number 2, we have 2 teams in this tier, and I'm calling this one playing for second place, because these are 2 Eastern Conference teams that, while very, very good, in my opinion, are still a clear step down between the top 2 teams in the West. And so while obviously somebody has to represent the Eastern Conference in the finals, and these are the 2 by far leading candidates to do so, ultimately, I kind of feel like it's going to be quite an uphill battle for either of them to knock off the top teams in the West. So I kind of feel like they're playing for second place, but that's not to take away from how good these teams are. And also, if either of these teams were to make the finals, it would be an incredibly, incredibly successful season and one of the best seasons in franchise history for either of them. So starting off with number 4, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers, who last season got off to as hot of a start as humanly possible. They started 15-0, a nice cushion for them to kick the year off. They finished the season with 64 wins, going into the playoffs as the number 1 overall seed. One of the favorites, I think Boston, a lot of people still thought was the favorite in the Eastern Conference, but they were right there neck and neck with them. Everybody had sort of been anticipating this Celtics-Cavaliers conference finals matchup, and the funny thing is neither team ended up getting there. The Cavs were a little bit banged up during the playoffs with Darius Garland missing some time, then kind of rushing his way back and was a compromised version of himself when he did finally play as well. Evan Mobley missed a game. So they were just a little banged up, but they kind of got the shit kicked out of them in the second round against the Pacers. So I'm of the belief that I'm not sure they were going to win that series anyway. I picked Indiana in the series before the series started, regardless of any of the injuries, but a lot of those injuries were known going in anyway. So the point is, it was a little bit of a disappointing finish to the year. I think there's obviously ways for this front office and organization to sort of use the built-in excuses of health being a big thing for them, because even the year before when they lost in the second round, Jared Allen didn't play in the playoffs. Mitchell gets hurt in the second round against Boston. So I feel like if you're a Cavs fan, you probably feel like you haven't had that fair of a crack at it over the last couple postseasons. But regardless, they haven't looked great. But they have a little bit of a revamped team. They trade away Isaac Okoro in the offseason for Lonzo Ball, who, in my opinion, is a significantly better fit and upgrade for this roster. I don't really know what the Bulls were doing with that one, but just add that to the list of questionable Chicago transactions over the last half decade or so. But then they lose Ty Jerome in free agency, but add Larry Nance Jr. and Thomas Bryant as well. They draft Tyrese Proctor in the second round, who looks like he actually might be a part of this rotation as well. And so there is a lot to like about this Cleveland team, because mainly they are incredibly talented with their top 4 guys. That core of Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen, there may not be a better foursome of players across the entire NBA. All 4 have made all-star games in the past. Yeah, Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell were all NBA players last year, deservingly so. And so that foundational core of those 4 guys is going to give them an incredibly high floor as a team, particularly in the regular season, where they've just been really, really, really good in this iteration of this Cavs team, especially with how weak the East is going to be this year. They're basically a shoo-in for 50 wins every single year. They've won at least 48 the last 3 years, but I'll say this, the year that they only won 48, Mobley missed 32 games, Mitchell missed 27 games, Garland missed 25 games. So you have to think they at least tack on a couple more there if those guys even miss 5 to 10 less games. So they've basically been a walking 50-win team. They've averaged 54 wins over the past 3 seasons. And with how weak the East is, there's really no reason to believe that they won't once again be one of the top teams in the East, if not the top team. I think most people view the Cavs as the favorite to not only be the number one seed, but in a lot of instances, a favorite to make the finals and represent the East there. And I actually think that a lot of their supporting pieces are better than what we've seen in the past. The small forward position has kind of been a revolving door for them. They've tried different guys in and out between Cedi Osman and Isaac Okoro, Dean Wade, all these guys. But it feels like a lot of times they have sort of a trade-off. Do you want more defense with Okoro, but then you're suffering from shooting? Do you want Sam Merrill in that spot where you've got shooting, but then not as much on the defensive end? Then Cedi Osman's kind of like just okay at both. Dean Wade's a fine 3-and-D guy most of the time. But with DeAndre Hunter now in the fold for a full season, I know that he's injured right now to start the season, but he will be back at some point. It's not a serious injury or anything like that. But he's the best combination of shooting, defense, size at that spot that they've had. But then you add in guys like Lonzo Ball, like I mentioned, who gives them just an increased amount of lineup flexibility because he can play with just Garland, with just Mitchell. You could probably throw all three out there at the same time because he does have size there. But he's also just a great fit next to those ball-dominant guards because he's a great passer connected piece, but he's proven he can play off ball. He's a plus shooter. If he can, we've at least at his peak see him be one of the best perimeter defensive guards in the league as well. Obviously, the question is going to be health. The guy has had a roller coaster of a career from a durability standpoint, and it's hard to really know how much you're going to get out of him. But he appears to be healthy now. I'm sure they have some plan for him to, try to make sure he's healthy by the end of the year. But again, he's just a really nice fit and a huge upgrade from a guy like Okoro, in my opinion. Then you've got Hunter, like I mentioned. Larry Nance, I think, is the best backup big that they've had over the past few years as well. They've kind of almost not even had a backup big for a lot of these seasons because they can just play either Mobley or Allen and stagger them at the center position. But having just another versatile guy like Nance always helps. But then you throw in Sam Merrill, who's a knockdown shooter, Dean Wade, who is a good 3-and-D guy, Max Strus, who's also injured at the moment, but will be back at some point, has been a reliable, fifth starter for this team as he was with Miami previously. And that's just like a very solid 10-man rotation and probably the best combination of talent and depth and fit that they've had. Because like I said, they've had a lot of clunky fits along those four guys throughout this period. But I think one thing that I definitely want to see out of Cleveland a little bit more this year to kind of prove to me that maybe I have them ranked too low is to try to experiment a little bit more in the regular season. When Kenny Atkinson came in last year, he did a really, really good job of establishing a system that just worked. I mean, they were a juggernaut, a machine last year during the regular season. But you need to be able to be flexible and pivot and make adjustments. And it didn't feel like that part of their game plan was developed enough. And so I'd like to see them maybe experiment a little bit more. Maybe they lose some more games as a result, but I think that's okay. They won 64 last year. Even if they won 55 this year, they're probably good for a top 2 seed at minimum. And I think it'll pay dividends in the postseason because, like I said, they've just been not as great there. But the reason I have them fourth and ranked below the Knicks, for example, is because the proof of concept of what this looks like, the successful version of this core of Cavaliers players in the playoffs looks like, I haven't seen it. They've been together for 3 years now since Donovan Mitchell was traded over, and they made the playoffs all 3 years, and they have looked just flat out bad all 3 postseasons. Their first year, they're relatively big favorites, home court advantage against a Knicks team that was really not that talented aside from Brunson, but it was not quite the level of Brunson we have now, and then Julius Randle. And they just got their ass kicked. They lose in 5 games. They got manhandled from a physicality perspective. They just looked overmatched physically. Then the year after that, they do win a series. They beat Orlando in the first round. But again, Orlando, this was second year Paolo Banchero. He's 21 years old. He's like the only guy in the offensive end of the court that can do anything aside from Franz Wagner, but he can't shoot at all. So like, it's just, given how young and bad that team offensively was, there's no reason that series should have went 7 games. And Orlando was up 20 points in Cleveland in game 7 before a big comeback. And not to mention that Orlando outplayed them across the board. They had the Cavs had a negative net rating in that series. So overall they got outplayed. They won the series, but the point is that's the kind of team they should be doing light work with if this is a legitimate contender. And then they get beat pretty handily by Boston in the next round. And then last year, they looked great against Miami in round one. Not just great, they absolutely demolished Miami in round one. But that Miami team won 37 games and was a shell of what they had been earlier in the year when they had Jimmy Butler. And then in the second round, again, I know they had injuries, but Indiana just kind of kicked their ass. I mean, they just looked like the better team across the board, both ends of the court, more cohesive, and honestly, like more deeper, more talented even. So I don't know. I just 3 straight years of them looking like a compromised version of what we saw in the regular season come postseason time. They're kind of in a I need to see it to believe it territory for myself personally, which is why I'm hesitant to pick them to go to the finals, why I'm hesitant to put them above New York, for example. And there just are question marks. It's like, can they play the same level in the postseason? Can Garland and Mitchell coexist? Obviously, it's been able to work well in the regular season when Mitchell was willing to defer a little bit to Garland. But come postseason time, when their back's against the wall, Mitchell has a tendency to just play hero ball and say, okay, fine, if our system's not working, I'll take over. But then that completely minimizes Garland, and they get into this super one-dimensional offensive team that, of course, he can put up big numbers, but does it lead to wins? We haven't seen that happen yet. Not to mention that Garland has been injured in the postseason a lot, and when he has played, he's been targeted like crazy on defense. So his impact as a postseason player is still a little bit up in the air. Jared Allen has straight up just looked kind of soft come postseason time, just not as effective as a presence down low. And then Evan Mobley. Everybody talks about this guy like he is a top 15 player in the league. I've heard people say, like, could Mobley win MVP this year? I've heard the comps to Kevin Garnett, to Giannis, to Anthony Davis. Like, I think Mobley is a very, very good player, and I've always been high on him. I've always liked him. But that kind of praise and those types of comparisons are just disingenuous for what we've seen out of him. I know he has room to improve, obviously, but to put it quite frank, he's limited offensively. His shot has gotten better, but it's still not at a high enough volume where you really trust it all the time. And then he's just not quite there as a creator to the level of the types of players he gets compared to on the offensive end of the court. Obviously, defensive player of the year, tremendous on that end of the court. He's versatile offensively, can do a little bit of everything, but he hasn't proven to be the go-to guy. And that's part of why Mitchell feels like he has to take over all the time, because when things aren't going well, Mobley, he kind of just still keeps doing what he does, which is be a complementary offensive piece, but they need more out of him. And so these are all the question marks I have with the Cavs, and it's ultimately all going to come down to the postseason. They can win 60 games this year, and I don't really care if they do so, because until they at least meet expectations in the postseason, not just surpass, because they haven't even met expectations in a single postseason yet. Until they do that, I'm going to continue to be skeptical. And especially if we're in year 4 now and they fall flat again, I really think the pressure of switching up the personnel is going to mount for this team, especially when you consider they're a second apron team and they don't have any other moves other than to trade one of their core guys. So Cleveland, a top tier Eastern Conference team and contender, no doubt about it. But those, I have slightly more hesitations because the proof of concept of postseason success has not come to fruition yet with this core. Up next at number 3, we have the New York Knicks, who last year made a pretty drastic personnel change not far before the regular season. It was right around when training camp kicked off, where they traded Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo for Karl Anthony Towns, on top of having already added Mikal Bridges in the offseason. So they came in last year with a pretty revamped roster. They bring back the same core of guys, but they made a couple nice additions as well. They signed Jordan Clarkson, who was bought out from Utah, Gershon Yabusele, who comes over from the Sixers. In the process, they lose Campaign, DeLon Wright, Precious Achua. But overall, I would say a net positive in terms of the players that they had versus what they had last year. And I am very high on the Knicks this year in terms of their ability to take hold of the Eastern Conference because one, I think the year two factor kind of matters. We see this a lot in the NBA where you make these big acquisitions, and in year one, you're still kind of getting used to everybody playing together. And then also because you made these big acquisitions, you don't have as much opportunity to add on the fringes. So lots of times there's depth issues or small little fit concerns that you don't have the chance to address because you made these big moves and a couple more transaction cycles. It just makes it easier to be able to mold the roster together more cohesively. But then also just another year of these core four guys playing together. So I think the year two thing is relevant. It's not super common for these year one big acquisitions of like an all NBA level player to come in and to win immediately. And I thought the Knicks, honestly, at the very least, met expectations and a lot of way exceeded expectations last year after knocking off the Celtics in round two and making it all the way to the conference finals. Obviously, I know Tatum was out for the last couple of games there, but they were going to win that series most likely anyway. They were already up 3-1 and had thoroughly outplayed Boston to that point. So we saw how good this team could be against a Boston team that was a little compromised, but still what most people thought was the favorite in the East. So I think that, again, that's a building block. You know, they had lost the second round the past couple years, but they make it one step further. And this just strikes me as the kind of team that's like going to use each of these previous postseason losses to build off the last one. So the next natural progression for me would be for them to potentially get to the finals. But aside from just that, I think that the bench is definitely improved, like I mentioned. It's a little bit of a bummer because I was very excited for them to have Malcolm Brogdon. I think obviously he's had significant health issues, but to add him as their sort of combo guard off the bench, he's overqualified for that just with his skill set and the track record and resume we've seen out of him as a player. But obviously, he kind of unexpectedly retired last minute, so that was a little bit of a bummer. But for me, Yabusele is a huge add. I think he gives them versatility. They did not have a lot of depth at the wing spot last year. Like, obviously, you've got Anunoby and Bridges, and then Hart, who's kind of a guard, but kind of can play up to the four anyway. But outside of that, as sort of their core, they didn't have, like, they're playing Shamit as the backup small forward at times, who he's just a little undersized for that. And they just didn't have like an alternative at the four spot outside of either Anunoby or Cat. So adding Yabusele, who can also play small ball five with or without Cat, for example, or can play alongside a guy like Mitchell Robinson because he can space the floor a little bit too. I just think that he had a really underratedly solid year last year for the Sixers, and that was just a sneaky add. So I really like that for them. Clarkson, on the other hand, I think a lot of people like that move. It doesn't move much of a needle for me. I just am not totally sure what Clarkson's good at this point. He can generate shots a little bit better, but he doesn't score efficiently at all, and he's kind of a zero defensively. And I feel like his type of player gets kind of phased out come postseason time. I could be wrong. I'm willing to be wrong. Maybe his numbers were down in Utah just because there was a lack of motivation for winning, and he'll be sort of more revitalized this year. But Miles McBride, I'm high on him coming into this year. I think he's a sneaky contender for sixth man of the year. I liked what I saw out of him last year as a two-way guy that can maybe do a little bit more. So overall, I just feel like the rotation I feel better about it. But one of the reasons I feel better about it is because I know that Mike Brown's actually going to play these guys. I think the coaching change does matter in this because it feels like they had kind of aged out of Tibbs. They had kind of reached the peak they were going to peak, but some of the core issues of this team last year was that they just didn't play their bench enough. And so when they needed to, it was like they hadn't experimented with the right lineups to know who plays well together or what players can do what in certain roles. And so that's kind of what the regular season is for, is to carve out roles for all of your players. And you need to be able to experiment a little bit. And Tibbs just didn't do that. And I think Mike Brown is going to do that. And so that willingness to give a guy like Tyler Kolek more of a chance, to give a guy like Huck Porty more of a chance, like who knows, maybe those guys won't be good enough to play come postseason time, but you have to figure out if they can. And so being willing to play some of the younger guys more, being willing to, not have Shamit rot on the bench for the first two series of the postseason until you absolutely had to play him when your back was against the ball against Indiana. Like, these are all things that I just think are going to help the team long term to take some of the load off of their top guys. And then also on the Mike Brown front, I really believe that he's going to dissuade Brunson from being that heliocentric do-it-all guard for this team. Obviously, you want him to be able to do that when the team needs it, and he's very good at it, but it is not a sustainable style of play. We have seen that in NBA history. I mean, like all of the top super high usage guys, the teams always burn out. It's just how it goes. And it also minimizes some of the other guys, like Mikal Bridges, for example. We saw a little bit more in the postseason. He started to actually get involved in the offense, and you can see that he did develop these skills with the Nets, where he can be a little bit of a secondary creator, secondary ball handler, secondary scorer. But he was minimized into basically a stand in the corner 3-and-D role guy for a lot of last season, just like OG Anunoby was, who I think Anunoby, you want more in that role. I don't trust him quite as much with the ball, but Bridges has proven that he can do that a little bit. And to give up 5 first-round picks for the guy, it's like you think that you would want him to do some of that stuff. That's why you brought him in, not just to play defense and shoot threes, but to, actually be involved in the offense more. So I'm hoping and relatively confident that Mike Brown can actually get more of the other guys involved, not only the bench players who can get more extended minutes to experiment with lineups a little bit more, but with allowing guys like Bridges to be more involved on offense to take some of the load off Brunson. So one, that he doesn't have so much wear and tear, but two, they can actually have legitimate ball movement and more consistency on offense. But look, that aside from all of that, this team's just super talented between Towns and Brunson. That is a deadly, deadly top 2 duo from a scoring perspective in the pick and roll, the pick and pop. Both guys can get you a basket basically whenever they need to. And Towns is such a wild card as a player and a mismatch, just forcing other teams to have to guard 5 out all the time. But it seems like Brown also is going to start the year with Towns at the 4. So exploring more of that. Like, again, Tibbs didn't do that until the postseason when he kind of had to. And Mitchell Robinson was super impactful when he did get that opportunity. And so, again, just the NBA today is all about malleability, flexibility, lineup diversity. And I just feel like they have more options to do a lot of that stuff now. And two, they have a coach that's going to be willing to experiment more with those things instead of just default operating into these are my 5 guys and I trust them, and then I'll spare them their 3 minutes on the bench per game when I absolutely have to kind of vibe. And it just, that has not worked for the Knicks so far to this point. But there obviously still will remain questions with New York, regardless of who the coach is. I talked about this when they got eliminated, but the Brunson Cat pairing, for as great as they are offensively, they are just inherently limited on defense, and having to hide 2 guys on the court in the postseason is really difficult. You can get away with hiding one pretty easily, but those guys need to be on the court down the stretch of games because of what they bring offensively and just because of who they are, obviously. But on the defensive end, they were huge liabilities last year, particularly Brunson. And we obviously know Cat has been a bit of a liability over the years on the defensive end, especially in the postseason. And so they're going to need to figure out how they can overcome those limitations, because last year Indiana tore them up and they got totally exposed defensively, and to the point where the Knicks played better by the numbers when Brunson was on the bench. And a lot of that was just because of defense. So that will continue to be a question mark. Can they scheme well enough to have those two be somewhat hidden defensively and still be effective there? They also do have some injury prone guys. Mitchell Robinson already has not played to start the season, and we know how important he can be for this team. We saw it in the postseason last year with the Celtics literally game planning against him. That's how impactful he was. OG Anunoby was strangely very healthy last year, but has not been healthy throughout his career. So it's fair to wonder if he might be due for some injuries this year as well. And then even with Mike Brown coming in and my hopes for him to take away some of the heliocentrism of this offense, it doesn't mean that he's definitely going to do that. I think it's easy to fall back into the, okay, Brunson, please go save us, that they've done a lot of in the postseason. And so, like I said, that just hasn't been sustainable. So, but I'm high on the Knicks overall. I think that, to me, they're the best team in the Eastern Conference. I think talent-wise, they match up just as well as Cleveland, but I've seen it more. I saw them in the postseason last year elevate their game. I saw some other players play better than they did in the regular season, like in Bridges' case. I saw them look just tougher than their opponents. They were the more physical, better executing, tougher team against Boston last year. Cleveland has not really done that against any quality opponent in the postseason over the last 3 years. So the track record's just there more for this group. Like I said, they've kind of been building year over year on just progressing and getting a step further each season. And so the Knicks, for me, I think they could win close to 60 games. I don't know if they'll quite get there, but to me, they're the favorite for me in the East, and they will be my pick to make the NBA Finals from the Eastern Conference, just because the combination of talent, the potential upgrade with the coach, the increased willingness to play different styles and adapt, the improvements on the fringes of the roster. And the East is wide open, like I said. So it really does seem like it's a 2 to 3 team race out there. I've mentioned that I'm higher on Orlando than a lot of other people. I think they could potentially beat either New York or Cleveland come postseason time. But I mean, other than them, I don't see any scenario where really any other team in the East knocks off either of these top 2 teams in the East. So it's really going to come down to, who do you like more, the Knicks or the Cavs? And for me, I just prefer the Knicks for all the reasons I laid out. I need to see it with the Cavs. For the Knicks, I understand what it looks like come postseason time. And I think that while they do have some clear limitations, particularly with their star guys on the defensive end, they have enough around the fringes to cover up some of that and be good enough on offense and with the rest of the defenders out on the court, and just their toughness, their physicality, their ability to execute late in games. Like, I've seen all of that before. And so I'm just going to continue to trust them more than I do Cleveland, for example. And so that's why I've got the Knicks in the finals this year. Okay, up next we have tier number 1, the top tier of teams in the NBA this season. This tier is called deserved favorites, because these are the 2 teams that are just, to me, a clear cut neck above the rest of the league. I think that we never know with injuries. I won't say shocked, but I'd be kind of surprised if it isn't one of these 2 teams that wins the championship this season, barring injuries. I think that they should be the favorites not only in the West, but in the entire NBA, hence why I had tier 2 called playing for second place. I think the Cavs and the Knicks both would unfortunately not have much of a chance to beat either of these 2 teams, just because of their top tier talent, their championship pedigree, the depth around the rosters now, and really just the top star guys they have at the top of the roster too. So at number 2, we have the Denver Nuggets. This is a team that I have been sort of critical of over the past few seasons in their front office, because I don't feel like they were committed to going all in on what is one of the top, probably 10 best prime of a careers that we've had, maybe in NBA history. I mean, Nikola Jokic has been so spectacular over the last half decade that he has elevated the floor of what's been a mediocre roster over the past couple of years to kind of fool you into thinking they're contenders. And maybe they were. Like last year, they nearly beat OKC, but it was all because of him. I mean, they have some pieces, but there was just inherent issues with the depth on the team, with lack of reliability with some of the other core pieces on the roster. And so this offseason, they finally listened to me and decided to actually shake things up a little bit and add some pieces on the fringes. So their biggest move by far was to trade Michael Porter Jr. away for Cameron Johnson from the Nets. They also added Jonas Valanciunas, Bruce Brown, Tim Hardaway Jr. They get Day'Ron Holmes back, who was their draft pick last year, who tore his ACL preseason, did not play at all last year. But for me, I mean, I think this is one of the best supporting casts, if not the best supporting cast, that Jokic has had throughout his career. Jamal Murray, we know what we're getting out of him. He finally looks to be on the healthier side to start a season. It feels like he's been banged up to start the year almost every year over the past few years. But if we can get sort of a non-compromise ramp-up start to the season from Murray, then that's always a huge plus. But we know that he's good enough to be the co-star next to Jokic, assuming all the pieces around fit well. Aaron Gordon's coming off the best year of his career. He just dropped 50 in their first game this year. So, I mean, he just continues to get better and better. That shot clearly looks like it wasn't just a fluky hot shooting season last year. If he's just a legitimately good shooter now, then that is such a game changer for them offensively, because that's really been, when they won it back in 2023, one of the biggest issues they had was that spot. The Lakers in the conference finals were just not even really guarding Gordon out there. But if he can make it at even like 37, 38% consistently, then he needs to be guarded. He's a threat out there. So that's a huge plus for them. Christian Brown had one of the most efficient guard seasons in a very long time last year. He got his extension, but he needed to step up last year for them, and I think he sufficiently did, to the point where they can trust him as more of a core piece now. And then Cam Johnson. I think that he, one, is just a better player than Michael Porter Jr. I think Porter is uniquely talented as a shooter at his size and the efficiency in which he can put the ball in the basket from long range and the mid range. But that's basically it. He does not bring a lot else. And then Cam Johnson, statistically not as good of a shooter as Michael Porter Jr., but the guy shot below 39% from his career one single time from three. So he's also reputationally a dead-eye shooter. So you're kind of swapping out a good shooter for a good shooter, but he does so many other things better. He's not some lockdown defender on the perimeter, but he's a good team defender. He's a high IQ guy on that end. He knows where to be, and he's just slightly more versatile on that end than what Porter brought to the Nuggets over the past few years. Offensively, he is a connective piece. He keeps the ball moving. He is a great mover and cutter without the ball. He fills the lanes well. Like, he's just a high IQ guy that Porter sometimes lacked in that department. And he can also put the ball on the ground a little bit. Like, again, you don't want him as your primary guy, but in Brooklyn last year, he ran a lot of pick and rolls. He got downhill to the basket a lot more than he has in the past. Like, these are all things that Porter just struggled with. Not to mention that he has just been an injury liability as well. Last year he was playing, but clearly compromised. That's not the first time that's happened for them come postseason time. So to me, Cam Johnson's just an upgrade across the board for this team. So that alone would have made me like the Nuggets more. But it's the pieces on the fringes that have really gotten me excited about this Nuggets team, because the center position behind Jokic has just been a huge, huge hole for this team. The on-off numbers reflect that this team basically falls apart when he's out of the game. And they've actually had to basically play Aaron Gordon as their backup five come postseason time. And they have to stagger their minutes, which is not ideal, because you want those guys playing together because they play so well together. But with Jonas Valanciunas, he is by far and away the best backup center they've had during this little 4 or 5 year run of contention for the Nuggets here. And again, do you want him playing 25, 30 minutes? Probably not. But as a 15-minute per game guy, like, he can fill in with the best of any backup centers in the NBA. I mean, he's a big body down low. He can rebound the ball well. He's stretched his range out to be a little bit of a spacer from deep. Like, he's a good passer in general, not some elite rim protector, but at least someone you got to think about when you're going to the basket. So that just being less of a pain point for this team when Jokic leaves the game is just a huge plus. And then they bring Bruce Brown back, who was wildly successful for this team previously when they won the championship back in 2023. We don't need to sit here and be like, oh, how is he going to fit in? Because we know exactly how he fits in, and it's really well. I mean, the proof of concept of what Bruce Brown is on this Nuggets team is well documented. We've already seen what it looks like, and he was a key piece as sort of the backup point guard that can also basically play up till power forward for this team as a versatile player on both ends of the court. So he is a great add. They get him for a minimum deal, which is just an absolute steal. And then they add Tim Hardaway Jr., who, I'm not the biggest Tim Hardaway Jr. fan at this point. I think he's a little bit of a liability defensively and can get a little shot happy. But this team has lacked shooting. 3-point shooting has been a big weakness for them. So I think it's a great ad just in terms of he's another guy that you trust catching the ball in the corner and putting the ball up, which they have not had a lot of guys like that around this roster, especially on their bench players. Like, even just replacing a guy like Russ in the corner with Tim Hardaway Jr., that is night and day. And so just having him in that spot, and as a guy that's like your 8th or 9th man, it's not like he's some key cog. They absolutely need him to be out there for 30 minutes and hit shots. Like, if he's missing shots, getting picked on defensively, that's fine. He's more of a luxury at this point. And then another guy I want to talk about that is probably not going to be talked about much is Day'Ron Holmes, their rookie from last year who tore his ACL and is back this season. I think they said he might start the year in the G League, but I actually think he can be very impactful as a bench piece for them as well. He was someone I was high on coming out of the draft. He is sort of a John Collins type player where he can play the 4, he can play the 5, he can shoot a little bit from outside. He's a good athlete. He's not going to do much creatively offensively. He's more of a post player and a pick and pop guy. But on this team, they won't need him to do anything more than that. And then defensively, again, not some big giant rim protector or anything like that, but passable enough defensively. And so he's another guy that's going to give them options, that he can play in the Aaron Gordon spot at the 4. He can be the backup 5 in certain matchups if Valanciunas isn't playing well. Like I think down the line, he will come back and matter at some point for them this season. But it's not even so much about they added these bench guys. It's that over the last few years, they've looked at Julian Strawther and they've looked at Hunter Tyson and looked at Jalen Pickett and said, like, we need one of you guys to step up, or because if we don't, we are not winning the championship this year. Like, they put so much pressure on these guys to basically have to be strong rotation pieces, or else they were going to be 6 or 7 guys deep and that's it. And none of them really stepped up. Strawther had some moments last year in the postseason, but was not a consistent player. Peyton Watson's probably the one that's been the most impactful, but we've seen what it looks like at his worst, and it can be really ugly when he can't hit shots and is a little undisciplined defensively, etc. But now all those guys, they are a luxury. If Julian Strawther turns into a professional backup point guard that can play a consistent 15 minutes a game, then that's just the cherry on top. Like, they don't need that to happen for them to win the championship. But if it does, it just makes them even more dangerous. So they essentially shifted from, we need a young guy to step up to get where we want to go, to we've got what we need. And if a young guy steps up, now it just takes us up another notch. And so that is why these additions are so key to me, not just because what they can do on the court, but because they move the young guys down from a necessity to a luxury, which is a good place to be if you're looking to contend like they are this season. Ultimately, it's very hard for me to bet against Jokic. Obviously, last year against the Thunder, I think they were just completely overmatched from a talent perspective, to the point where it was going to be really hard for him to overcome it. But they went to Game 7 with the Thunder last year with the group they had, which is wildly impressive when you look what the Thunder did against the rest of the Western Conference. And it makes you think that Denver probably could have, if they had found a way to win Game 7, there's a real chance they might have won it all last year just based on that. Who knows what they would have looked like against Indiana. But the point is, they looked ready to compete with this team, even though they were undermatched. So to me, now that they are more evenly matched from a depth and talent across the board standpoint, it's going to be really hard for me to pick against Jokic, even against OKC, because I just think he's that good. I think he is pushing himself towards top 15, top 10 all time. If he wins another one, I think we really have to start having that conversation. And him with the probably best supporting cast they've ever had, I really like what I saw to David Adelman in the postseason last year. I thought he was more willing to make adjustments than Mike Malone had been previously. Of course, there's going to be questions with, is Murray going to replicate the all-NBA level play he's had in the postseason in the past? But outside of that, I don't have a lot of question marks for this team. I think everybody else, I basically know exactly what I'm getting. I like the depth. I think Jokic is the single hardest entity to knock off in the postseason in today's NBA. And so I actually do think that the Nuggets not only will beat the Thunder, win the West, but win the championship this season. They're my pick. I know I have them number 2, but that is out of respect for what OKC did last year. But I just could not be higher on this team. I love everything they did in the offseason, and they have the best player in the world in the peak of his powers. And so it's going to be really hard for me to pick against them in any series. And then lastly, the number 1 team, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder. No big surprise here. They won 68 games last season. They were dominant. They had one of the best net ratings in the history of the NBA, one of the best relative defensive ratings in the history of the NBA, one of the best records in the history of the NBA. And they made it all the way to the finals and knocked off the Pacers in 7 games. They kind of cruised through the Western Conference outside of that Denver series. But they bring everybody back. I mean, they didn't lose anybody. They didn't really add anybody. They drafted Thomas Sorber mid-first round, but he tore his ACL, so he's not even really going to be playing. They get Nikola Topic back from injury, but then he ended up needing to have surgery again. So they basically have the same roster they had last year. And normally I'm a big don't get complacent, even if you won the championship, keep adding. But it's hard to argue with it because a lot of these guys are really young. A lot of them are going to continue to still get better. Even guys like AJ Mitchell, who were not even close to the rotation last year, have looked very, very good to start this year in the absence of Jalen Williams, for example. And so it makes complete sense why they would just run it back here and not make any drastic changes. And there's really not a lot of questions about this team, to be honest with you. I mean, SGA is firmly in his prime, dropped 55 points this week already, coming off an MVP season in which I thought he deserved the award. He wins finals MVP, just his play translated to the postseason. He's one of the 3 best players in the NBA, if not top 2, without a doubt. And he just continues to get better and refine his game and, improve upon his weaknesses and all of that. So I've got no questions about the guy at the top. Jalen Williams, I thought really, really put his big boy pants on towards the end of the playoffs last year. Like some of those games he had in the finals were just big time performances that really alleviated most of my concerns about him as a number 2, which had kind of been the narrative around this team for a while. And so I know he's injured right now, but when he comes back, I have no worries about him. I think he's sort of ascended into one of the best number 2 options in the NBA at this point, and he's only going to continue to get better. Chet, we know what he brings, especially on the defensive end. I think probably one of the biggest question marks for them still is Chet on the offensive end, at least, because, he did not shoot it particularly well during their finals run last year. He's now shooting 28% across 33 postseason games now. So his shot really has not translated. And offensively overall, I mean, if you just look at the finals last year, he shot 3 for 19 from 3. He was sub 40% from the field, only 12 points per game, less than an assist per game. So offensively, he can still look really limited. He's another one of those guys where I think the way people talk about him is more on his potential. I think he shows flashes offensively of being a just guy that can space the floor, attack the basket, all of that. But it feels like he still doesn't have a signature go-to move he can fall back on, something where I can put the ball in his hands and feel good that he's going to get us a good shot type of thing. So we'll see if he can grow there. Again, he's incredibly young and he's only going into his 3rd season. He's played less than 150 NBA games in his career to this point. So I'm nitpicking here. Again, this team does not have a lot of weaknesses, but I just want to say that is one thing that I think that could get them up a level is if Chet develops into a more reliable scoring threat and more reliable shooter. Like if he shoots 40% in the postseason last year instead of 28, that's a huge difference. Like that's swinging multiple games throughout their run. But defensively, we know what we're getting out of him. He is spectacular in that end, and he's still really, really good and could easily make an all-star game this season, for example. But then outside those top 3 guys, I mean, they're just young, they're deep, they're athletic. Kason Wallace, I think, is prime for sort of a leap up at some point, either this year or the next coming years. I think he can be more offensively than what he's shown. Caruso, Dort, we know exactly what we're getting at those guys, just devastating defenders that can shoot offensively and provide a steady hand as veteran presences. Hartenstein was a huge add for them last year, just giving them size, improving their rebounding, allowing them to overcome the Chet injury last year because he was just so rock solid at the center position. They didn't need to rush him back or anything. But Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Kenrich Williams, other Jalen Williams, like AJ Mitchell, they have so many guys and they're just so next man up that I have no concerns. Like they're going to win probably 60 plus games again because of how young they are and how much talent they have. And the really only question will be, do they have sort of a hangover where they take the regular season a little less seriously? But again, I'm not worried. They could probably do that and still walk their way to 58 to 60 wins. So the Thunder, they're kind of weirdly boring to talk about because we just know how good they are. They haven't made any changes, and we know what we're getting out of everyone. It's just going to be, can the other teams around them improve enough to get to their level? If we are going to nitpick a little bit, though, I think that the areas that they could use improvement are shooting and just half court execution. I know they had good offensive ratings last year, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that they lived in transition because they turned their opponents over so much. So we've seen it look a little clunky, a little ugly in the half court. Their shooting's not always falling all the time. So if they can either have an opponent that plays well enough offensively to limit the turnovers, then they become more vulnerable. Or if their defense is good this year, but not like all-time good, then that could make a difference as well. Last year they were like legitimately all-time level good on defense. If they're just like third in the league defensively, still a really good defensive team, but not among some of the all-time defensive great teams, then that also could make a difference because they might generate less turnovers. Then they might be able to win with their defense a little bit less, and then they'll have to do more offensively, which again, they've been a little bit inconsistent there. But this is all nitpicking. The Thunder should be tremendous this year, but I will urge them that it's really hard to repeat. It's really, really, really hard to repeat. We have not had a champion not only repeat, we've had 7 different champions in 7 seasons. And not only that, but we have also had 7 straight champions not even make it out of the second round the next year. We have not had a team that won the championship make it all the way to just the conference finals since the Warriors back in 2019. So that tells you how difficult it can be to get back to the mountaintop because a lot of things have to go your way. You don't just have to be really good. You have to not run into a particularly bad matchup. You have to be healthy, like avoid injuries. OKC was banged up a lot during the regular season, but come postseason time, they were very, very healthy. Like who knows, Aaron Gordon hurts his hamstring in game 7 and like maybe he doesn't do that, then maybe Denver has a better chance of winning. Then you look at game 7 in the finals, Halliburton tears his Achilles. Like if he doesn't do that, maybe they win. So they got injury luck on the other end and they didn't really have any bad luck on their end. So, and I'm not taking away, like every champion ever needs luck. That's just kind of how it goes, but maybe they don't get that luck this year. So that is something to think about. That is one of the reasons why I'm picking Denver over them this year, is just because of the difficulty of getting back consecutive seasons. And so I do think they'll make the conference finals. That would be my pick in the conference finals, would be Denver and OKC. So I think they'll at least break that trend. But back-to-back is incredibly difficult to do. And so they could lose this year and still come back the next year and win it again. And, it's all of that's on the table. But I'm typically hesitant to jump to the back-to-back or dynasty or anything like that until we've seen it a little bit more. And right now, I mean, they were spectacular last year. There's no reason they shouldn't be as good, if not better, from an on-paper standpoint this season. But the sample size is still only 1 year for them being as good as they are. And it's easy to jump to conclusions based on that. But again, nitpicking, they're going to be really good. There's a reason I have them number 1 here. And a lot of that is just out of respect for what they did last season and how good they can be. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. Thank you so much for listening. The season is underway, as I mentioned, so I'll probably have a podcast up within the next week or two just to talk about early trends and stuff. But I am very excited. The season's off to a great start so far with some big-time performances. Wemby looks like an absolute freak. SGA's been going crazy. We've had a couple other 40-point games. There's scandals going on with Chauncey Billups and whatnot. So I may get to that down the line, but I tend to like to keep this more about the actual basketball. So we'll see. But as I mentioned, I should have more coverage once we get the sample size up a little bit beyond just a game or two, more in the 5 to 10 game range, for example. And then we'll start to look around the landscape of the league and maybe potentially overreact to some things. So I appreciate everyone who listened through all 6 of these contender tiers. Wanted to break it up again this year so that it was less of an earful all at once. And apologies again for not getting it all out before the season starts. But with that said, thank you so much, and I will talk to you soon.